blue hair with red dots. So after about a week, they fired me from the job. And this was probably the last one I did at that time. It was New Year's. I did this with my son. He was like 1 year old. I gave him the red chalk. I said, put some red marks on it. This is, the actual piece is about 6 feet tall. I'm into jazz. This was Sonny Rollins, who was one of my favorites at the time. So this was all before I was Willie Cole. This is just when I was a brother. My family calls me brother, so I was just a brother. What are you doing, brother? Man, I'm just drawing a little bit. So it took a few years to become Willie Cole. I moved into the studio, still doing pastels, you can see, and paintings. And for the printmaking department, I also made silkscreen T-shirts. So I got my Bob Marley's T-shirt on there. And that painting there was the painting that I was working on when I moved into the loft. The loft was my temple. It was the place that changed my life. It was 3,000 square feet. It was $250 a month, so I didn't have to have a job to pay for it. So I just paid for it by doing portraits on the street. This is always upside down. I'm going to skip this one. But it shows that same time in my life. But this was the studio at the point where it became the house of irons. So you can see on your left side, I have some irons that I've turned into houses and made cast of cement houses with irons on each end. And so the studio changed my life. It had a courtyard in the back, and I would go down there because there was so many homeless people in the neighborhood. It was pretty much an industrial neighborhood after the industrial era. So all the buildings were abandoned, and homeless people were always huddling around fire to stay warm. So I got the idea I could use fire to heat up my irons. Well, it was horrible from back there. But it's me scorching an ironing board. And the scorching really changed my life. This kind of explains the whole scorch concept a bit. Is this mic on? Can you hear me? So I found an iron, and I had this habit. I didn't do it graphically, but I did it in words. Almost like what my son calls it, a Lewis diagram from physics. So I had my key thing was the iron, and the iron was domestic service. But the handle of iron was black. So those two together made black domestic help. Of course, she's connected to slavery, connected to Africa. The iron looked like a boat. So if I crossed this one and this one, I ended up with the slave ship. Her just regular household stuff, equaling money. Above, in the first two rows, it's the symbol of iron. The elements that make the steam iron possible, the heat from the fire and the water. And up top, the African gods. I got Shango here, who is lightning, which I call fire. I have Ogun up top, whose element is iron. And I have Yenaya over here, whose element is water. So, but I had that at the time as a list that was much longer than this diagram. And I was able to get concepts from that. I don't know, like it's a microphone. Get elements from that for many years. And somehow, when I was trying to make a living in New York as a painter, I wasn't getting any attention. Trying to make a living in New York as an illustrator, I only got work during Black History Month. But when I started doing these scorches, suddenly the whole world knew who I was. So as you saw in the previous slide, I would just use a can of fire and take the leg of the iron board, attach to the iron, and just make patterns randomly. I never had any sketches or anything like that. So it's just play. This piece is called Zulu and Silex, because it's a Part2 Silex iron, but it looks like a Zulu shield. So Zulu and Silex. And it's, if you know the size of steam iron, you can estimate the size of the piece. I really don't have notations about sizes. But through that process, I had a whole mythology about the people of iron, or the cult of the domestic. And these are people who worked, say in the master's house by day, and practiced African religion or rituals in the evening. And it was kind of based on reality. Like if you go to Cuba, you'll see people practicing Santeria or Candomblé, which is based also in the Yoruba religion, but they'll be using the Catholic saint statues and calling them African names. So I took that same concept with the steam iron. So this is probably my most popular pieces in so many museums, called Man, Spirit, Mass. So of course, the man is easy to identify. He has scarification, which ties him to the tribe. It's actually Silex scarification. He's a Silex man. This is the spirit of Silex. I call this the spirit because the iron is physical, but you look at the iron, you don't know the power of the iron until you. So that becomes spirit, scorch. And this is the mask, which is the cover, the iron itself. This was done at the Brodsky Center in New Brunswick, part of Rutgers University. They do print making residencies if anybody wants to apply for that. And I guess to speak technique in this group. How many art students are here? Oh, good. So I have to tell you, I'm like a homegrown artist. I went to school in the 70s, and we were like that far from the hippie days. So education was hangout time. You know, we didn't learn and do and technique and all, at least at my school, School of Visual Arts. At Boston U, I went there for a year. It was so serious I left. Back to New York to hang out, you know, with everybody else. So all my prints are collaborative prints with master printers, which is a nice feeling for me. And everything is just, as you'll see as I go on, it's just over time, I just figure out how to do things. I learned about sculpture by being a laborer on a construction site. I didn't know about power tools, if I had Chuck Close for painting, he taught us his grid technique at School of Visual Arts. I had Jonathan Borowski for sculpture. He was so conceptual, we never did anything. We had assignments like go outside, choose a stranger, and follow them for the day. Now, at BU it was more serious. You know, we had to make the skull and do that, all that kind of stuff. But my real experiences came from just being a laborer on a construction site. Oh, that's a drill. Oh, that's a saw. So this is wood. This one's a wood block. This one's this was digital, and this was a screen print. So of course the image iron was enlarged, and we put lemon juice on a paper and put it in a photo dry mount press to get those flares coming off the side there. This is probably the second most popular of my iron pieces, called Stowage. It's also in a lot of museums here. And it's based on an image in history of the Brooks slave ship. And this is 1997. I was moving out of my studio, the one I showed you here in Newark, and I found this book that I had since I was a little kid called Johnson's, it was called Ebony's Guide to African American History. Actually, it was called Negro History back then, because it was a book I had since I was 8 years old that my mom bought for me. And I saw the image of that slave ship there, and at that moment, I recognized that slave ship as a steam iron and an iron board. So this, of course, is the ship. You can see the slaves all huddled in like sardines. This could represent where they're laid out in the ship, or this could represent